Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to a brand new episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And here with me today is my special guest, Jenny Wells. It's good to see you, Jenny.
You too, Jordan. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really
Oh,
grateful to be here.
oh, yes, thank you so much. Now, the film that Jenny has selected for today's episode is the recent 2017 indie film, The Florida Project, directed by Sean Baker, starring Willem Dafoe, Brooklyn Prince, Valeria Cotto, and Bria Vinaite. I actually watched it yesterday, and it's very much like what I see at home, very much so. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So can you tell me about why you chose this film and why this film why you think it has a special place within you that you want to connect to. So why did you pick this film?
Absolutely. So I think what initially drew me to the film before watching it myself and kind of hearing about it in the media and among some of my colleagues in the mental health field is that it doesn't really follow your typical structured storyline or narrative. It's more so like an experience, right? Of what it's like to live in an impoverished situation, with people with diverse backgrounds and, situations that come with struggle and things of that nature that different people can resonate with. And so, naturally, as a therapist, it just kind of drew me in that way. And without me even knowing it, being an adoptee myself, I
Mm,
really resonated specifically with the characters Hayley and Moonie.
mm,
As I know that they're not adoptees themselves, but it's the story that they kind of tell through their own lived experience really resembles my story,
mm.
and my own personal journey as well. So yeah, we can get more into that, but that's what initially kind of brought me into the Florida project. So yeah.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Now, in regards to the Florida project, I know some of the locations very well because I passed by the Orlando area, and I know that in the end credits it said it was filmed in, I think it was sunny Florida, is what it was, which I think is part of Orlando, Florida. But I love the idea that even though it is not, as you put it, a well-managed structured story like we often see in Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
It felt more like a character drama that was more about the that it was more from the child's perspective because you have the
Yes.
main yes, because it was from the character of Moonie played by Brooklyn Prince, who I have read has now gone on to actually a very steady career right now.
Mhm.
She's doing a lot more projects. And I thought this was a pretty impressive performance that she gives in this film. But you said that you identify with the characters of Haley and Mooney in the film. What was the situation that was depicted in the film that made you say that is what I went through, or that's something that's almost ripped out of my life? Like,
Yeah.
what would you say is something that connected you to that moment?
Absolutely. Great question, Jordan. I specifically am an adoptee from Florida. I was adopted from Miami, but it was a very similar situation for me. My birth mom struggled with similar, not exact to Hayley, but she, was, a single mom, was struggling with poverty and incarceration, substance use issues.
Mm,
Um, and I actually have a birth sister who was in and out of foster care. And then I was actually placed into adoption through an adoption agency.
mm-hmm,
So it kind of tells the story for me personally in my heart what my life could have looked like if I took a different path, which is
mm-hmm,
very powerful for me. But I think especially it's powerful too for people watching, right? To kind of put it into perspective, these different real systemic issues that are going on in society that we
mm-hmm.
might not see on a day-to-day basis. But specifically going back to your question with Moonie and Hayley's story, what kind of brought me in, and you touched on it as well, the eyes through a child, right? And the imagination that children can, come up with in the mind, to deal with these, systemic and difficult and complex issues. I think that Sean Baker did an amazing job of creating this very colorful, vibrant, playful childhood nostalgia through the cinematography of the film, which I
Mm,
think really brings out a lot of those feelings, at least for me,
mm,
from childhood, and kind of coupling in what experiencing those complex issues looks like for a child through their eyes.
mhm,
Um, and I think for me too, the way that he depicted the the weather, the atmosphere, the environment of what it even looks like around Disney. I
mhm,
know that there was a scene that was really powerful for me of when Hayley and the kids and Moonie were watching the fireworks from
mhm.
Disney, but it was
Yes.
from the outskirts, right? And so it's like I love these type of movies, especially these indie films that really bring out these strong emotions, and symbolism that I think goes so much deeper than the traditional film. So yeah, I could go on, Jordan, but I think that specifically kind of sums up what really, really draws me to the movie.
It does. I mean, in the end credits, he specifically wanted to thank, I don't know if you noticed this, he wanted to thank Hal Roach and the Little Rascals for the inspiration for this film to
Oh
put that
my
into
gosh, no, I missed that. That
oh,
is so cool.
it is. So okay, so what I read was Sean Baker, who directed this film, said that instead of putting it through the eyes of the adult, about because I don't think in the film they mentioned about we know that Haley is a sex worker in the film, but
Yeah.
when I brought this up with, let's say, my mother, she thought, oh, was there somebody who brought her? I thought no, it looked like she was doing it through it they didn't get into like the specifics of
Yeah.
like the trafficking and so on. We just know that she's a sex worker, but we don't know
Yeah.
about like that. Anyway, so what we know in the film, according to Sean Baker, was he wanted to take that from the perspective of the Little Rascals, because if you ever watch the short films, it's always from the child's perspective. The children are the main characters and the adults around them are the ones that uh are like sort of the comic relief in those films. But in this film,
Yeah.
which I find very interesting, is that we see that the children, they don't know about what's going on because the adults around them are struggling, or they have these real life situations, and the children don't know about this because I wouldn't say they're naive, but they're just very curious. They're very
Yeah.
curious. They're very curious. They are unaware of these certain things, and they do what other kids would do at their age, which I thought was pretty impressive. And I also read that the dialogue that each of the actors, especially the child actors, were given was improvised.
Mhm.
It was improvised dialogue. It wasn't scripted or anything. It was basically that they would talk about what the scene was going to be about, and they had to put in whatever they could into the story to make it believable, which is what I think made the story entirely realistic.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think that there's something really special about that that goes beyond traditional Hollywood films and
Mm-hmm.
kind of taking that a step further as well. I know that Bria was actually found from Instagram. So she
Yeah.
wasn't even an actress before the Florida Project. Sean actually found her from like a few Instagram posts that she had made.
Oh.
And yeah, I heard him say this in an interview that I was listening to at one point, where he actually said that when they were going through the casting of the Florida Project, he kept coming back to her Instagram and
Mm-hmm.
asking his like casting team, um, I wish we could find somebody like her who was an actress. And then somebody said to him, well, why don't you just have her audition for the role
That's it.
and see, how it goes. And I think it was the same way with Scooty too. I think
Yes.
he was, I don't know this as well, but I think and I might be wrong on this, so don't quote me, but I think he was a resident of the motel
Mm.
and was cast in the film. So
Yeah.
they took,
Uh,
bits and pieces of like real life individuals and
mm.
incorporated it into the film, which I think is really special.
It is. I imagine Sean would do that in his other project where he would cast real life individuals who were not actors, but bringing in real people to be cast in this film and also credited. It would
Yeah.
be good to be credited. to give that realism of his projects. I know he did it for some of his early films that he made in the 2000s up until the 2010s decade, and now this decade, the 2020s decade. I I don't remember what his recent project is right now, but it's supposed to be coming out, I think, in the summer or already came out this year. But
I think it's like Allura or Aurora. I'm,
okay.
I might be misremembering it, but I did see that that's coming out. And they received, I think, a pre-award,
Mm,
but it hasn't been like the movie hasn't come out yet. So,
okay.
yeah.
But yeah, I do like that Sean Baker is going for the realism approach because as you watch this film or any of his other films, he does have those wide shots in his pictures, like of the landscape. It's very static and it does give you, it almost feels like you're seeing it through the eyes of, like international cinema, but it's right in the United States, which I think
Yeah,
is what makes his films so unique. Um,
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely is right. And I know this, I know for some of the audience members who may not have seen it, but there's there's one thing that always made me sort of curious. The ending when Moonie was going to be sent to a foster family because her
Yep.
mother was going to be, I think she was going to be arrested because they saw footage of what she did to Scooty's mom, and also the
Yeah.
fact that she was soliciting and doing all
Yeah.
these things. She ran to the only person whom she can trust, and that was I think Janice in the picture.
Jancy. Yeah.
Jancy, yes, in the other motel. And that was the moment where I couldn't tell if this felt like an open ending to me when
Yep.
she was about to cry and she was worried that they were going to take her away from her mother. Jancy
Mhm.
just took her hand, and the perspective switched from, traditional digital cameras to now it's like shot from a GoPro or an iPhone, and they were
Yep.
running away from the home into Disney World,
Hmm.
which I thought, could it have been like from her imagination or did it really happen? So that's why I thought it was sort of debatable in
Yeah.
that last sequence. So what did you make of the last shot in the movie with that perspective?
Yes, I love that you're asking about this because I think, as cliche as it is, the last scene of this movie is huge. And it's something that is actually controversial when you research the film. There's some people that are very divided about it and maybe don't see the symbolism of it or are upset that it wasn't a more straightforward ending. So it is
Mm,
interesting to see the divide there. I think some people are just more artistic with the way that they see their films, and kind of like that open ending. So it's very interesting.
mm-hmm,
Um, I'd say for me, the way that I view it in my
mm-hmm,
kind of open ending in my mind, is that they actually did go.
mm,
Um, I think that, you know, I think it equally could have been in her imagination. There are some people too that there's like this car theory that they think she was run over by a car, and
uh,
that was what she was seeing in the last moments as she was dying, which is like really
yes.
brutal. But
Mm-hmm,
I get that too as being a theory. Um, but for me, I being an adolescent therapist, working with trauma, working with artists and creatives, I'm also a former educator, and I've had a lot of experience working with, different kids and people across the lifespan. And kids specifically are so resilient. And I think that is a huge theme of this movie and was something that really stood out to me about this ending scene
mm-hmm,
was like you could even tell in the facial expressions of Moonie and Jancy both, you know, that they were really trying to wrap their minds around what was going on with CPS coming and Moonie running away and Jancy, kind of being bombarded with this information. And so I think the way that my mind went was, this was children's
mm.
resilience coming out. Um, and shining through this really complicated and upsetting situation. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, yeah, it was pretty. it was pretty unique to see that ending, because the way that I noticed it was that it was, I think I counted, there were like at least a few different sequences that they filmed, like just of the kids running from from the motel all the way to the other locations, and then straight to like
That's
the front
true.
front
Yeah.
to the front gates of Disney, and then going inside the Magic Kingdom. And I imagine, because this is an independent movie, the parents must have been with them because they cannot leave them unsupervised or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's just what I thought was interesting about that ending. And also, even though it's an independent film, I always thought that Willem Dafoe, no matter what film he's in, big budget or low budget, he really, I thought, gave his performance as, I wasn't sure if this was his role, like the manager of the motel, or if he
Yes.
was, okay, he's the manager of
Yeah.
the motel. And I like that, even though he is the guy who is trying to take care of Hayley and her daughter Moonie, he also is trying to be responsible and not lose his job because of certain
Yep.
things that that has come to his attention, whether it's one scene where, well, it's in the opening when you had the three kids spinning on the car of Janice's mom's car,
Yeah.
and then another sequence where it's like uh Hayley and Moonie were selling these bands that they actually stole from this one
Yep.
guy. He was the only person who was trying to save her from whatever happens, no matter what. And I understand that he's trying to protect her, but also he has to be protecting his own job, which I think is his duty.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought he gave a great performance in the film, and so did the other cast members in this film. And being a Floridian myself, I noticed a few things that are very much that speak home to me. The weather, of course,
Yeah.
the nightlife, the oranges, of course. When they go out to, I think it was called Orange World, where Scooty's mom works, because in
Yeah.
the movie she is, I think she's a waitress.
Hmm.
And I actually looked up, and some of those locations that they shot in the movie, they're no longer exist. They were torn down.
Really?
Yes,
Maybe that was due to like the influx of visitors
I imagine
going to
so.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, either that, or maybe they were trying to buy off these lands that were buy off these lands that were starting to become desecrating, and they needed to turn that into whatever they needed
Mhm.
to turn it into. So I think that's the reason why they had to remove those. But it was great to see what it looked like, because I passed by the Orlando area, but I never actually got to pass by like where they filmed the motels in the movie, which I thought would be pretty unique to go pass by it someday. Um,
Absolutely. They actually painted that motel from pink to gray.
wow.
It's so sad. And I'm not sure, you make a really great point with, maybe they were very purposeful with what lands they chose to film on. And maybe it was because maybe they were abandoned or struggling or things of that nature. But it is interesting that after the movie and the popularity of the movie is kind of um, come to an all-time high. I feel like so many people know about the Florida Project now. They chose to paint the motel gray because there's so many people that are like, I want to visit the pink motel.
Uh, wow. It's amazing though. But I do like in Sean Baker's movies, and it's very much like a theme in his work. He always focuses, instead of on like the middle class or the upper class, he focuses on the impoverished or the lesser known, like the marginalized
Yes.
communities, which I think is what is central to his amount of work. He did it from the film Takeout, which he made in 2004, Starlet. He did a film called Tangerine that was in 2015, shot entirely in Los Angeles. Red Rocket in 2021, starring one of my favorite actors whom I remembered from the 2000s, Simon Rex. And I didn't expect him to do a really great performance in that film. To the one of the films you mentioned. So I thought it was pretty interesting that he was going for that approach to focus on those communities instead of like on the communities we often see in mainstream movies, which I think is why I think he's such an interesting filmmaker to look at.
I totally agree. And I think that from my perspective as well, being a social worker, I think that focusing films on marginalized communities and these systemic issues that are going on in society is amazing, because I think that we need more media attention and awareness and education brought to these issues and these populations of people that
Mm-hmm.
are ignored. Um, and so I would hope that with more of these films coming out in Hollywood and across the US and across the world, that hopefully we can bring more awareness to these issues, and possibly more grant funding and you know uh, legislative support when it comes to these issues as well. But it's, he's kind of utilizing his platform for good, which is
Absolutely.
really amazing.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And I also like that in his films, like independent cinema, which I understand that you mentioned, I think we do need more independent cinema, in my opinion, because
Yeah.
I mean, I like mainstream films on one hand, but right now, because I've been seeing that some of the studios are leaning towards more IP, IP like properties that they own instead of
Yeah.
like original stories and sequels and spin-offs. I'm like, I mean, they're okay, but it just doesn't feel original as it used to be, or risk taking. They were not like they're not risk takers anymore, which is I think the sad part of some of these studios. And also you got mergers and acquisitions and all these
Yep.
things. And with independent studios, I think they're more risk takers. I think it's more awareness ready because it's I think the lesson I get from some filmmakers when they talk about independent films is when you work with less money, you get a lot more creativity
Yep.
than when you work with a lot of money and you don't get as much creativity as you expect. Because I've read some filmmakers that started off making independent films, they start working on mainstream movies, and then when they work in the mainstream movies, like I would say the one example I would give was the director of the Fantastic Four reboot from 2015.
Mhm.
His film, the film that he made, had a lot of studio interference, and it felt like it was rushed into production when I watched the
Yep.
finished film. It didn't look like it was a really artistic film. It felt more like the studio just interfered and they just rushed it into theaters, and it didn't feel like it was finished. It felt like an incomplete movie, is what I saw.
Yep. Yeah. I definitely agree with you. And I think that there's so many movies like that that I watch, especially in the past couple of years, that just feel incomplete. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a really great way to describe it. And I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with what you say about independent films having more of that risk taking aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they bring in that authenticity that I think comes from, a normal amount
Mm-hmm.
of budgeting and supplies and, things that they have to source that film
Yeah.
comes in, a lot of that authenticity and, kind of genuine storytelling that I think so many people are missing in today's society, is that
Yeah.
realness that they want to connect with. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I do want to thank some of the distributors that are able to bring some of these films out. A24, Neon,
Yes.
Oscilloscope Pictures, all these independent distributors that didn't gain much notice or attention until maybe like a few years ago. And now they're starting to be recognized for like some of the filmmaking styles of whatever director makes for these films, and they're pretty interesting to watch. And I understand that for some of the films that come from these independent distribution companies, that they could be a little bit puzzling or questioning if you are seeing this from like overseas, or maybe you're just not familiar with this film because
Yeah.
of different cultures. But that's what I think is so interesting about these independent distribution companies. And at the older filmmakers that used to rely on the studios, because some of the studios that the filmmakers used to rely on, they were risk takers. They knew how to
Mhm.
take those types of stories But because, as I mentioned before, with IP and all this sort of stuff and AI and all this sort of stuff that's going on,
Yeah.
they're now moving towards the other side, which are the independents, because they I think they have much more creative aspects than the mainstream studios used to have, but not anymore,
Yeah.
which I think is the sad part. But I mean, that's the one thing I always look to. I It's the same thing with I always like animation, but because of what I mentioned earlier, I think independent animation as well as independent live action filming, to me is my only option if I want to watch really good stories
Yeah.
nowadays, from different perspectives, whether it's as we mentioned before, the marginalized, the color barrier, or maybe the gender barrier, or anything, or cultural barriers. I think they're
Yes.
much more interesting to look at, um, in terms of whatever topics or issues that haven't been explored or haven't been maybe discussed in this medium.
Absolutely. You make so many great points, Jordan, and I completely agree with you. And I think that Sean Baker, all of these, independent film companies are doing such a beautiful job of bringing in that authenticity and genuine nature. And I'm hoping that more of these, creators and artists, within this realm can come to the forefront more. And I'm really, really hoping that AI is not going to take over film. I know that that's a concern for so many people in different industries as well, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to art. So yeah, such a complex topic, but so
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
It is. And as a film editor, I always have concerns with the rise of artificial intelligence. I know that now some companies I've read have utilized artificial intelligence in their software systems or in whatever places they put it. My concern as somebody who looks to the film industry is, I understand that they're trying to negotiate or ratify contracts to make sure that they use it as a tool and not let them use it as an alternative. But sometimes whenever I would read a headline, like I think it was somebody at Sony was saying that they were going to use artificial intelligence as a way to cut down on budget prices or whatever that was
Mm,
going on. And I'm like, I hope that what he said is a mistake, because if whoever said that thinks this is going to be the new norm,
yeah.
uh then I then my question to that person is, then what does the artist who is so good at his or her work, where will they go?
Yep.
Because if they use it as a tool and it's not in their name, then where will they go? What job
Mhm.
will they have? What would they do if the next big thing comes along and they have to learn how to use it? So that's my question to whoever is in charge, because I understand it's a scary thing, and that I used to, as a kid, like CG and thinking that was going to be the next big thing. And
Yeah.
then as I got older, I'm like, CG isn't that great as it used to be when I was young, because it used to be cool. And when I watch some of the movies that use a lot of computer generated imagery, they don't look that realistic to me anymore. They
Yeah.
feel so, and I know we talked about artificial intelligence, they feel so artificial. They feel so fat. They feel so unrealistic. Because I don't know, I used to watch like older movies, or maybe filmmakers would say they would use something that feels real instead of like artificial. I think that's what I'm looking at as I got older as well.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm really hoping that more of these more of these independent films can come forward and that people resonate with that authenticity like we've talked about.
Yes.
Because I think that's what people are looking for is that connection and feeling seen and heard, not only from the people around them, but also the media that they're consuming. So yeah.
Yeah. So so to make sure we wrap things up. Okay,
Yeah.
uh so what is your current so what is it that you do, so that my audience can be aware of, like, what is your job, and how did you get to become friends with some of the people we mentioned to on earlier on the show?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not directly friends with anybody at the Florida Project, but I am a holistic therapist and associate clinical social worker in Los Angeles. And I specialize in working with artists, creatives, actors, and musicians. And I absolutely love to tie in things like films and music and things of that nature into therapy because I think that these things are so intertwined, right? Like we talked about with the Florida Project,
Hmm.
with systemic issues that people face, mental health, existential, thoughts and um, all of the things kind of going together. And so I really appreciate you, fostering this space to talk about film, to talk about the symbolism and the meaning, that we all take out of the art that we consume. And yeah, it's been lovely to meet with you today, Jordan. And yeah, if anybody wants to check out, my services and how I tie in, art with mental health and things of that nature, they can check out my website. I will give that to you. My website's jennyflorawells.com. I'm also on TikTok as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So jennyflorawells.com. You're on TikTok. Are you also on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook?
Great question. I have a professional Facebook page and I do have a LinkedIn. I don't have an Instagram. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I know that I tried my best to ask those questions.
yeah.
Um mm, so before we go, do you have any like recommendations similar to the Florida Project in the themes that we discussed about, as well as in maybe the topics that were discussed in the film, that maybe my audience could look into that is similar to this film?
Ooh, yeah. So I actually recently did a TikTok video specifically about like movies that give you a deep understanding of different issues, that are going on in the world. So some of the other ones that came out for me were mid 90s.
Okay.
Um, the other one that I love, Little Miss Sunshine.
Ah, yes.
I love that one. And then also Inside Out. I know that is a Disney film, but
Hmm.
it's really, really great when learning about emotions and the mind and like our different defense mechanisms that come out for us. Um, and the last one escapes me, but anything from A24. I love all of their films too. So
Okay. Okay. Did you get to see the new movie of Inside Out?
no, not yet. Is that out?
I think it's supposed to be out around this month or next month is what I read.
Well, I'll
Uh
have to check it out. I'm excited.
yeah,
I have heard that it's coming out. So yeah.
yes. And I wasn't aware that it stars Ethan Hawke's daughter as the voice of one of the new emotions in this new movie.
Oh, really?
Yes, so his daughter voices one of the new emotions because in the film, Riley, I don't know what age she is because in the first film she was like an adolescent. I think she's
Yeah.
now becoming a teenager. So now they have like 4 or 5 new characters as part of like the emotional aspect of the story.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I'll have to
Yeah,
check it out, but definitely recommend that film to kids, teenagers, adults alike. I think that it gives us, again,
mhm.
some of that deeper understanding. So
It
yeah.
yeah, it does. I have seen Little Miss Sunshine with the great Abigail Breslin, who
Yeah.
also has done great things. She was actually in Florida for at the Gasparilla Film Festival for one of the films that she was in. I think it was called like oh my gosh, the name escapes me too. Uh but Miranda something, Miranda's Rights or something like that. But it's independently made. It was shown for the first time at the Gasparilla Film Festival at the Tampa Theater, and she was in the audience,
Oh,
talking about the film and how it relates to today. And I think she's had a stable career. I'm not saying anything bad about her or like her brother, Spencer Breslin. um that's the one thing I never understood because I always thought it was one of the siblings used to be talented when they were younger, and then the younger sibling gets more and more offers than the older sibling, which I thought, I don't know what it is with Hollywood and offering other roles to like the younger versus the older. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure, but
Yeah,
that is super interesting.
it
But
is.
yeah. Those are my picks.
Yes. Okay. So Inside Out, Little Miss Sunshine, mid 90s, and the name that escaped you.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so uh for my audience who has never seen mid 90s, could you give like a brief synopsis of what this film is about so maybe they could look into it as well?
Yeah, the film follows a young boy named Stevie in Los Angeles in the 90s. And basically he meets a group of friends at a skate shop, and it's kind of similar to the Florida Project, where it's more of like an experience. It covers issues around adolescence, abusive situations, community, things of that nature. So it has a lot of similarities to the Florida Project, but just in a different storyline. And I just really love how it brings out those systemic issues as well.
Yeah, and it was written and directed. I don't know if he wrote the script.
By
Jonah
Jonah
Hill.
Hill, yeah.
Yeah, Jonah Hill, who I think is actually doing good in both comedies and dramas. I think he does good in both, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always thought that the best actors who could transition to dramas are usually the comics, because in my opinion, whenever I see a comic doing a comic performance, I mean, that's what they were known for, but to pivot to like doing drama, it's like it's a game changer for some of
Yep.
these. It's a game changer for some of these comics to give out dramatic performances. So yeah, the Florida Project from 2017, directed by Sean Baker, recommended or discussed by our very own Jenny Wells, and the recommendations: mid 90s, Little Miss Sunshine, Inside Out. You could go check these out wherever you can find them, either on streaming or on Blu-ray and DVD. Okay, so thank you, Jenny, so much for being on the show, and it was a real pleasure to talk about this movie.
Yes, you too, Jordan. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is Jordan Ramirez signing off, and you have been listening slash watching a brand new episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez with my special guest, Jenny Wells. And until then, I'll see you at the movies. And until then, I hope we meet again someday, Jenny.
You too, Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, bye.
Bye.